When my wife and I met, I thought she was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen in my life. She had long raven hair down her back, the most crystal green eyes, skin like light caramel, and a face made for the gods to cry and fight to the death over. I had no idea her very first intention was to kill me. I don't know. How in the world do I go from my wife straight to she wanted to see me dead, right? I can't really explain it just yet. I don't want you to get the wrong idea about the love of my life. She's not a cruel or evil woman. She was just born different. For 2 years, I searched for her after her first attempt to kill me was met with confusion and frustration. She did what she's done countless times before, and it just didn't have any effect on me whatsoever. At first, she was angry. Why wasn't I responding? I knew, but how could I tell her? Then I might never see her again, which I just couldn't live with. So I returned to her, and again, she tried. Again, she was met with no response, and her anger was replaced with confusion. And as I later learned, intrigue. I was the first man she couldn't get to. The first man who saw her for who she was and not only didn't succumb to her charms, but actually returned so she could try anew. She became curious about my ability to resist her. All the while, I just wanted to drown in those emerald eyes, get another glimpse of that raven hair. I visited where we met again and again. Sometimes I would find her, and her attempts to snare me turned from frustrated disgust to mild playfulness. Finally came the day she stopped trying to kill me and tried to properly communicate in a way that I could understand. She came closer to me and touched her lips, then mine. The touch of her fingers on me shook me to my core, but I shook my head, full of shame, knowing that, like so many others before her, she would likely see my inability to talk pathetic. She tilted her head and looked pensively at me for a few moments, her bright eyes questioning. Then she covered her ears with her hands and pointed at my ears in turn. I shook my head, again ashamed of my disabilities. Being born deaf and mute, you get used to people looking at you with pity and treating you like a dumb animal opposed to a human. To my shock and utter delight, her beautiful sun-kissed face lit up in a semblance of a smile, and she nodded. I started to smile back at her, but in a flash, she disappeared. I waited a few moments, but she didn't return. I left, thinking now she knew that I was lesser, that I was a defunct and useless man. I couldn't give her the release she so desperately needed. I couldn't listen to her, couldn't speak or even hear her name. I could never win her. I decided not to return. My ego couldn't handle yet another rejection, so I returned to my life of solitude. I avoided the spots I had seen her near and went about living the way I always have. Go out on my small fishing boat, catch what I can, sell to the nearby village man who came by daily for my fresh catch, tend to my garden, eat my bachelor meals in the dim candlelight, wash, rinse, repeat. The chase for my beauty was over. She knew what I was. I was nothing. I could never give her what she wanted, and she didn't need anything she wasn't already provided. On that, she proved me wrong. The day I saw her again, I tried to stay away from her. I knew I wasn't the kind of man she wanted. So why would she waste her time on me? She came over to my boat and stopped me from leaving. For the very first time, I was scared. She had a desperately fierce look on her beautiful face, and for a few moments, I truly feared she had discovered a way to get through my deafness and kill me. She opened her mouth, and it was clear she was vocalizing. But as usual, I couldn't hear anything. I shook my head and tried to pull my oar from her delicate hands. She pulled it back so hard, I almost fell overboard. I let go, and she disappeared under the water with my only way to escape. I sat in my boat, marooned, without my oar. And I realized now just how she planned to kill me. With no way to return to land, I would die of thirst. My heart broke into a million pieces like a thrown china plate. Before I could sink into true despair, she returned to me. In one hand was my oar, in the other was a weathered skull. She climbed onto my boat, and the beautiful fin she had always swam around me with slowly morphed into the most beautiful pair of legs with the daintiest feet I'd ever seen. She then sat naked as the day she was created and offered me the skull. It's been 6 years, and in that time, I've taught her how to sign, read and write. She's told me of the countless decades alone, singing any man she meets to a watery death and eating them. Oh, how lonely her life has been, knowing any man she meets will only become her meal. She doesn't know where she came from, or why she's the only one left of her kind. And unfortunately, the small peninsula we're on doesn't have much in the way of more than fairy tales. Stories of beautiful women who sing men to their deaths. Stories of ships full of sailors who disappeared without a trace, leaving only empty husks of ghost ships behind. She hoped to one day travel to other waters to find others of her kind, but she couldn't travel far from her home. Because she explains, she became sicker the further away she got. Even my home, on the outskirts of the village, was a bit too far from her water, being on the opposite side of the peninsula from where I always found her. So I had a cottage built near the beach where she has said would be best. I docked my little boat, and she was well again. We signed and wrote each other about our lives, how lonely it is being so secluded from others. She of how she went from wishing she could keep a man to wanting to hurt them all because they were all too weak to resist her song. Me of how since my birth, I've been bothered by people who don't understand being disabled. Doesn't make me any less of a person than they are. When she brought me a skull, it was an offering of sorts, similar to a dowry. She explained to me that despite not remembering ever seeing another of her kind, she just knew that was a show of what she's come to know is love. She brought me the skull of the cruelest man she's ever devoured, explaining the more wicked they are, the better they taste. Lucky for us, on the other side of the village, larger ships dock. Sailors aren't always the best of men, and she's very, very good at seeing inside a man's heart. Now, my lovely wife only has to eat once a month or so, because being a bachelor for so long, as I have been, you learn how to properly cure and keep meat. My beautiful siren stays mute with me when we go into the village, but in our secluded little cottage away from everyone, she can sing as loud as she likes without fear of hurting anyone. After all, she has to keep that voice of hers in shape for when it's that time of the month.